Welcome to Biztech's Health and Wellness Show. Today we speak to Lance Diddle. He's the head of region at Roche Diagnostics Asia Pacific. Now, Roche Diagnostics is a division of its parent company, Roche. Now, the firm specializes in developing and integrating diagnostic solutions, and it operates in over 100 countries. To tell us more, Lance, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Brian. Pleasure to be here.
Now, Lance, for a start, could you give us an overview of Roche Diagnostics and its solutions in the diagnostic space?
Yeah, so diagnostics itself is something that the average person is not aware of, actually, although I would say that during COVID, we've all become much more aware of diagnostics. But what we do in Roche Diagnostics is we provide our partners primarily in laboratories with the testing technologies needed to allow them to help doctors diagnose disease. So that could be in the area of clinical chemistry or immunoassay. Molecular testing is something that people sort of hear a little bit about. Tissue diagnostics, for example, for oncology and cancer diagnosis and treatment, as well as point of care tests, for example. So you can really describe it as providing the tools to allow labs to give information to clinicians to help them diagnose and treat people.
Okay, so this is an important thing because you need to break it down for us in terms of the role that diagnostic plays in actually improving patient experience, improving outcomes as well.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a hot topic for me, Brian. I've got to be honest. So we, as patients, we're all consumers of health in some way. Hopefully, we're healthy individuals, and when we stay on the sort of monitoring for bad things side of things, or sometimes we have to interact with the various healthcare institution in whatever country we're operating in. But regardless of what it is, if we take the journey of a patient, so I'm unwell. So I then go and interact with a clinician or a nurse or an emergency department. At this point, the healthcare system or that clinician is going, what's wrong with this person? We have no idea. They're saying they're unwell. And what you might, I view diagnostics as four foundational pillars to healthcare. There is the face-to-face consult. So the doctor's saying, what am I seeing with this patient? Are they pale? Take the blood pressure, that's one pillar. Then there's the second pillar, which might be in vivo diagnostics, which is imaging, for example. The third pillar is largely my world, which is in vitro diagnostics, and I'll come back to that in a second. And then the newer fourth pillar might be what you might call digital diagnostics. So taking information from smartwatches and things and bringing that into the clinical picture that's sitting in front of the doctor at the moment. Very new and yet to be established in a systematic way, but I suspect in the future the digital diagnostics piece will actually evolve. So that third pillar of in vitro diagnostics, in vitro means taking something out of the body. Okay. When we go and have an X-ray, nothing is removed from the body. That's in vivo. When we have a blood test done, that's in vitro. So our laboratories that we provide tools to in the form of analyzers and technologies, they're all dealing with samples that the patient has given, right? So it could be a blood test, urine or feces, or a tissue, for example. They're the main sample types. And then on the basis of that, a whole bunch of testing is done. And those results come back to the clinician. So now the doctor has some data points. They have the patient that was sitting in front of them, and they have their blood work, if you like. And so when looking at that blood work, now they can go, okay, looking at the various patterns, the high and low results, they can start to point the patient through a journey of diagnosis and hopefully ultimately treatment and cure. So if you think about it that way, very hard to make decisions in healthcare without diagnostics. Very, very hard. It's like wandering around in the dark for the clinical world. They absolutely need the tools that diagnostics brings, whether it be imaging or whether it be in vitro diagnostics. So that's the way it fits within the healthcare environment.
Now, one of the key things is, and you brought up a very good point, literally it's the nuts and bolts of assessing, and to use really common terminology, really assessing where you're at. What is the situation analysis on your side? Yep. And one of the things, obviously, and you can highlight that because you're in the forefront of this as well, the fact that diagnostics has gotten better has enabled then this better and better targeted therapies to be applied to patients. Could you give us some insights into how, for example, Roche, you've been in this forefront of innovation?
Yeah. So the way I see healthcare and diagnostics is the same in this case. Is we have two challenges. We have what I would call it the top of the spectrum challenge, which is things like, how do we get more effective at treating patients? The more we know about disease, we can use targeted therapies, for example. We can do diagnostic testing on a tumor, understand exactly what that mutation is that's causing that tumor, and help the clinician decide on the specific therapy that will target that tumor, for example, right? So it's the very top end of the spectrum, and that's, a lot of work's being done in that space. And we personalized healthcare as an example, and it's something that Roche sort of pioneered many years ago, whereby rather than blanket treating everybody and the therapeutic only working in half of the cases, then we can do some testing to determine where best to target that therapy so it will work on those patients. And some other patients may need a different therapy. So that's the targeted therapy end, if you like, or sort of the leading edge of the development spectrum. However, we must not forget 47% of the world's population today does not get access to basic laboratory diagnostics. Now, what I'm talking about here is I'm not talking about molecular oncology techniques or anything like that. I'm talking about very simple liver function and renal function tests as an example.
And these are really common things.
Sitting where we are.
So, Lance, a lot of these are now in a Western context or in an advanced economy context. These are basic self-service tests.
Yes, absolutely. So, the challenge, I think, for us in the diagnostics realm is to deal with both ends of the spectrum. We've got work to do at both. And, if you look at almost half the world's population that does not get access to what you and I might describe as basic tests that in many countries of the world will be considered a given, the work down there is a lot about infrastructure work. It's about, are there laboratories, are there hospitals in the right parts of countries to allow patients to go there, for example? Or do they have to travel for 3 days if they're feeling unwell? Well, that's 3 days when they're not working and they're not able to feed the family, for example. And then, of course, there's the top end of the spectrum, which is our continuing work on innovation around breaking new grounds into hard diseases. This is the Roche philosophy is a lot about addressing unmet medical need. And that's why we have, particularly on the therapeutic side, a particularly strong drive around cancer care, and we have a strong history there. Also on the diagnostic side. So we have a philosophy whereby there is so much that still needs to be done for the society around the world, and let's tackle those hard challenges. And some of the tests that we've developed over the years reflect that as well, where patients are absolutely benefiting.
Now, so Lance, you look after the Asia Pacific region. What are the critical challenges that some of the countries in the region are facing from a healthcare perspective? And then, of course, this is a little longer question then, how is Roche helping in this fight against these challenges?
Yeah, it's a very big question, Brian.
Yes.
So my responsibility lies across 16 legal entities, 22 countries we support with Roche Diagnostics in the Asia Pacific region, and that's everyone from China and Japan and in the north to all through Southeast Asia, India and Pakistan in the west, and Australia and New Zealand in the south. So you can imagine these are very different healthcare systems. They work differently, and the standards of care vary right across those environments. I think if we look at, and so therefore it's hard to say a blanket challenge. Different countries are dealing with different dynamics. One of the fundamental ones, though, we have to consider is around health inequity. So if we were to, in an ideal world, if we would suggest that everybody, no matter where you were or your social standing, you were able to get access to the same level of health, a good level of health all the way through. Now, we're not in that situation, probably across the world, actually, if we're honest about it. Certainly in Asia Pacific, we're not in that situation. So I think one of the biggest challenges is how do we deal with inequities in health? And you can take lots of different groups and look at those and say, well, this group doesn't get access to health for the following reasons. If you look at health for women across the APAC region, that's actually an area where we're focusing very heavily on women's health, and we're doing a lot of work in very specific areas to try and address this health inequity. And a very good example of that is cervical cancer. So cervical cancer, for those that are not aware, is one of the few cancers that we know two things about. One is we know the causative agent, which is human papillomavirus, and if treated early, it's curable. So, this is a cancer that does not need to kill people, yet it does, okay? So the trick is to get screened early. Now, then if we look at the inequities across the region, you've got examples like financial inequities. They can be a challenge. Can the family afford to go and get an HPV test? That's one dynamic. Another one is the societal expectations around it. You've got, for example, cervical cancer from a societal perspective can be a little bit of a delicate subject. So many women will rather not go and get a screening test because it's an awkward topic to talk about, and they don't want to be judged in that way. And that societal dynamic appears in many different ways. There was a study done in Maharashtra around tuberculosis, for example, where 47% or above 40% actually of the women were concerned about going and getting a TB test because they were unsure that if they were positive, they were unsure whether their husbands would support them moving forward. So you can see there are many reasons, including perhaps access, where the technology is not available in a certain part of a country. So these are all of the work that we do a lot of work here to try and educate, try and make sure that the technology is available in the hospitals, the local hospitals, as well as the major city hospitals. And the interesting thing that a lot of people don't realize, particularly in the emerging markets, is our Roche approach is very much the testing and the technology that we make available in a rural hospital in Vietnam is the same as what you might get in a major central city in the United States. It's the same.
But how is that going to be? So you brought up a very important point around access. So 47% of the world's population don't have access to basic, what we would consider consumer type tests even.
Yes.
How is that going? Shouldn't we be looking at solutions around that as well, like really to make that consumer sort of products more accessible in less developed countries?
Yeah, I caution the word consumer actually here, but what we are talking about is fundamental tests. I completely agree with you, right? So the point here, and the reason why I'll say I'll caution consumer is because the thing about testing is things are not always black and white. So, for example, we could provide tests into a particular, say, a rural area in a country, but if there's no clinicians to do anything with those tests, then all we're doing is wasting healthcare money, actually, right? So because diagnostics is the foundation of healthcare, standing alone without other infrastructure around it makes no sense at all.
Makes no sense. Exactly.
No sense at all.
That's
right?
fundamentally correct. That there's
Yeah.
no call. So after the diagnosis is done, there's no call to action after that because there can't be.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So, it's a complex equation, but it's one that we're constantly addressing. And, finding ways by which we can work with governments, for example, and look at how we can get upstream. And a great example is some work that we're doing for hepatitis C in Pakistan. So this is where we've worked with the government. And, we've ensured that we have enabled the key laboratories around the country with the latest molecular technology, so as they can screen for hepatitis, because hepatitis C manifests, if untreated, manifests itself into liver cancer, for example. So not only living with hepatitis is a challenge, but actually the development through into liver cancer is a real problem. Cirrhosis, and then ultimately into cancer. So, we've installed latest technology across a number of the key sites, and this year alone, we'll screen about 370,000 patients for hepatitis using molecular technologies, the same as everywhere else in the world, whereas in the past that would never have happened. So there's 370,000 people that we will know whether they are likely to lead on to liver cirrhosis and ultimately cancer, or whether we can treat them for hepatitis now, or whether they don't have a problem at all. You can understand, you can see the flow on of good diagnostics at the beginning is huge downstream, and economically hugely viable for the healthcare system. Spending a few dollars on a hepatitis test up front versus tens of thousands to try and treat a patient with cirrhosis and liver disease and
But Lance, this is the challenge, isn't it? This is often the challenge in less developed countries. I've got X amount of dollars. I've got to spend this on hospitals. I need to buy equipment to basically fill those hospitals. Therefore, the thinking may be, let me not spend money on early diagnosis because I need the money for the hospitals. That is the dilemma that healthcare policymakers face.
Yep, these are the trade-off decisions. Absolutely right, and these are not lost on me. It's running our own business. I mean, there's always trade-off decisions. There's trade-off decisions in daily life, right? So this is the reality, and the challenge is often encouraging policymakers to take long-term approaches. And I think this is a lot about philosophy. It's a lot about philosophies of the stakeholders. You might argue, well, I've only got a pot of money and I've got to spend money on certain diseases and things like that. Okay, fine, right? Or rethinking the problem and saying, I've got a pot of money and I need to ensure a healthy population to be productive and happy. Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's a different mindset, right? So where do I spend a few dollars here to maybe save a lot down the road? But that down the road does come a bit later. So, I think it is as much the mindset. And, there's good examples in countries across the region. I mean, back in 2008, I was general manager of Thailand, and they were well into addressing the HIV challenges of Thailand, and the NHSO back in those days invested in HIV screening, and now Thailand is a very different place as a result. So the payoff is huge. It's just the willingness to look long term. I think that's from a political perspective and maybe a government perspective. However, there's responsibility on us as individuals too. And what I mean by that is we see that there needs to be a shift from, I will go and interact with the healthcare system when I'm unwell. We have to move away from that, and we have to start moving upstream and saying, I need to make sure I get a regular checkup.
Yeah, so this is the wellness paradigm versus an illness paradigm.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And to be honest, I suspect we're all guilty of it. I am. I just a month ago, I did have my annual checkup, so I'm feeling okay now. But I'd skipped it for a couple of years, and I think we all need to think about how we view health. And is it a bit of an insurance policy, or is it something I'll ignore until there's a problem? Well, very often the problem's too late. And the interesting thing is, there was a study that showed us, it's a year or two old now, but that showed that healthcare information is doubling every 72 days. So just think about, isn't it staggering, right? And that pace has been accelerating over the last 15 or 20 years. So if you think about it, right, if I ignore or choose not to look, there may be solutions to things that are coming that were not in existence 2 years ago, because healthcare is always evolving and changing and improving, frankly. So to me, it makes a lot of sense to encourage people to go, you know what, I will go, and to the best of my economic ability and the appropriateness of the environment I'm living in, I will get a healthcare checkup. Even if it's those basic tests.
And one of the things that, and this is a personal belief that I think is manifest among a lot of people, is actually the following. Technology has moved so much right now, really, and you said this a couple of times during the interview, that diagnostic is the building blocks, the fundamentals. Mm-hmm. Because technology is so good, essentially a lot of treatment outcomes can be a lot better if everything is diagnosed early.
Yes, absolutely. It gives the clinical teams more time to move. The one that most people might talk about more often is cancer. Many more options if you're finding a stage 1 cancer, regardless of the cancer, than if you're finding a stage 4 cancer. Heart disease is another one, for example, which heart disease is an interesting one, actually, because heart failure in 2019 caused the death in Asia alone of just under 11 million people. 11 million people in 1 year. Put the context around that. That's 20 times the number of people that have died from COVID to date in Asia. 20 times. Okay? So here's a problem. Now, and the problem with heart failure is the symptoms are very non-specific. So remember, I described those sort of 4 pillars. The first one was sitting in front of the clinician. Symptoms are very non-specific. Shortness of breath, swelling ankles, things like this. By doing a simple blood test, an NT-proBNP, a blood test, for example, we're able to definitively determine whether the patient has congestive heart failure or not. Without the test, there was a study done just prior to us launching the test where 50% of people that were sitting in front of the clinician were being misdiagnosed as having congestive heart failure. So in other words, going on to beta blockers and diuretics when they didn't need it. So cost to the healthcare system, right? Not good for the patient if they don't need those therapeutics, for example. Yet the use of that technology, that newer technology that came along, allows new insights into a whole group of disease of patients that, if untreated, are dying at a huge rate. So this is an example where the application of new technology, and companies like ourselves, we're not the only ones, but companies like ourselves, we really work very, very hard to bring in the new diagnostic tools to allow clinicians to get a better understanding than they had yesterday. So I think this is a really important element to understand about healthcare. I mean, every 2 or 3 years, things are shifting and changing, and making sure as an individual, while you're healthy, you're still connecting to that healthcare system is a very wise thing in my view.
Lance, it's been a fascinating conversation. I've really learned a lot. But before we leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
I think, I'm passionate about a few things. I've been in diagnostics all of my career, both in working in laboratories and also a long time with Roche. And more and more, this foundational element of diagnostics needs to be understood and talked about. Without diagnostics, clinicians cannot treat people well. And that's just a fundamental element. And I think, from our perspective, and just last year, to give you a scale of it, we produced 29 billion tests worldwide off Roche analyzers last year, right? 29 billion tests. I'd encourage everybody to think about their health in the same way they think about their bank account. Imagine if you looked at your health as frequently as you checked on your bank account. Wouldn't we be a different society, and people would be living healthier lives, more enjoyable lives, spending time with their families? So for me, it's a lot about shifting the mindset, understanding the role diagnostics plays, and the onus is on us as individuals to actually get out there and own this and be part of the solution.
Lance, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much, Brian. Really appreciate it and enjoyed the conversation.
I'm Brian Fernandez, and we've been speaking to Lance Diddle. He's the head of region at Roche Diagnostics Asia Pacific. This video will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.